I still remember the way the light from the hallway stretched into our dimly lit living room, casting long shadows across the walls. It was later than it should have been for this kind of conversation. But she stood there, by the door, her packed suitcase beside her, and she said it so casually, so coldly, as if she were just announcing she was heading out for groceries. "I'm leaving you." Just like that. 3 words spoken without hesitation, without an ounce of regret. I sat there, frozen, staring at her, trying to process what she had just said. It wasn't a fight. There were no tears, no build-up. No long-winded explanations about how we had drifted apart or how she had been unhappy for months. Just that. I should have felt angry, betrayed, something other than the numbing emptiness that settled in my chest. But in that moment, all I could do was look at her, at the way her fingers curled around the suitcase handle, at how she refused to meet my eyes. And I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, "Why now?" She sighed as if she were exhausted, like she had already played this conversation out in her mind and was annoyed she had to go through it. "Because I finally realized I deserve better, Joel." That stung. More than it should have. I exhaled sharply and leaned back in my chair, my fingers gripping the armrests. The weight of those words pressed down on me. It wasn't just that she was leaving, it was the way she made it sound like I had been holding her back, like she had been stuck in a life she never wanted. I should have said something then. Asked if there was someone else. Told her how cruel it was to leave me like this. Begged for an explanation. But instead I just nodded numb. She picked up her suitcase, took one last glance at the home we built together, and turned for the door. But that's when she froze. Because just as she reached for the handle, her phone, which had been sitting on the counter, lit up with a message. A name flashed across the screen, one I didn't recognize. And in that instant I knew. I knew this wasn't about her deserving better. This wasn't about outgrowing me, about wanting more in life. She wasn't walking away. She had already been gone for a long time. And I wasn't about to let her leave without finally learning the truth. For a few seconds, the room was completely silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. She had one hand on the doorknob, frozen in place, staring at her phone screen like she had just seen a ghost. And I, still sitting in my chair, felt something inside me shift, like all the missing pieces of a puzzle had just clicked into place. The name glowing on her phone wasn't familiar, but that didn't matter. I didn't need to know who it was. The way her body tensed, the way she refused to turn back around, the way her breathing hitched, it all told me the same thing. This wasn't a last-minute decision. She hadn't suddenly realized she deserved better. No, this was planned. Carefully, deliberately. And I had been blind to it. My chest tightened, but I kept my voice calm, almost eerily so. "Aren't you going to answer that?" She didn't move. I stood up slowly, pushing the chair back with the slightest scrape against the wooden floor. My legs felt heavier than they should have, like my body was resisting what my mind was just beginning to accept. My marriage, everything I thought we had been over long before tonight. She finally turned, but her eyes darted away like she was looking at everything in the room except me. "It's nothing," she muttered, pressing the power button on her phone so the screen went dark. "Nothing?" I repeated, my voice steady but sharp. "So, you're leaving me for nothing, huh?" Her fingers curled tighter around the suitcase handle, her knuckles turning white. "Joel, don't do this. Let's just what?" I interrupted, taking a slow step forward. "Pretend like this isn't exactly what it looks like? That you haven't been lying to me for who knows how long?" She finally met my eyes then, and for the first time all night, I saw something crack beneath her carefully constructed mask. Guilt? Panic? But also defiance. "You don't get to act like the victim here," she snapped, but her voice lacked the confidence I knew she wanted it to have. "Our marriage has been dead for a long time. You just refuse to see it." I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. "So, that's your excuse? That we had problems? That I wasn't perfect? That's why you decided to it?" "I didn't decide anything, Joel. It just happened." I laughed. Actually laughed. A dry, humorless sound that even surprised me. "It just happened," I echoed. "So, what? You accidentally tripped and fell into someone else's bed." She flinched, her jaw tightening. "You're being cruel." "Oh, I'm the cruel one?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "You're standing in our home, bags packed, you're nothing blowing up your phone, and I'm the bad guy?" She looked away again, but I wasn't finished. "You know, I would have had more respect for you if you had just admitted it. If you had looked me in the eye and told me the truth instead of feeding me some garbage about deserving better." Her lips parted like she was going to argue, but then she stopped. Because she knew I was right. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, my pulse hammering against my skin. I had so many questions, so many things I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers for. But at the same time I already knew none of it would change anything. So I did the last thing she expected. I stepped back. I didn't beg. I didn't yell. I didn't even ask who he was. I simply walked past her, grabbed my jacket from the hook by the door, and slipped it on. You're right about one thing, I said, my voice calm but firm. Our marriage is dead. But the only person who lost something here is you. Her brows furrowed, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. What are you, But I was already heading for the door. And as I stepped outside, feeling the crisp night air hit my skin, I realized something. She thought she was walking away from me. But really, I was the one walking away from her. The night air hit me like a wall, cold and sharp against my skin, but I barely felt it. I wasn't thinking about the temperature or the way my breath fogged up in the dim glow of the streetlights. My mind was stuck on one thing: how fast everything had fallen apart. How quickly the illusion of my marriage had shattered. I walked down the driveway, hands in my pockets, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. I wasn't even sure where I was going. Nowhere, probably. Just away. Away from the house that no longer felt like home. Away from her. But the moment I reached the sidewalk, something in me hesitated. I glanced back. She was still standing there in the doorway, her suitcase at her feet, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. But she wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the screen, her thumb hovering over it, frozen in place. And that's when it hit me. She was waiting for him. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. Of course, she was. This wasn't some last-minute decision, no matter how she had tried to frame it. She had planned this. Maybe not down to the exact minute, but enough to know she wasn't leaving alone. Enough to know someone was waiting for her. Someone who had probably been waiting for a long time. The betrayal sat like a stone in my chest, heavy and unmovable. But as much as it hurt, there was something else there, too. Something unexpected. Relief. Because for the first time in a long time, I saw her clearly. Not as the woman I had built a life with, not as the person I had loved and trusted, but as someone I no longer recognized. Someone who had been gone long before tonight. And I knew in that moment that whatever she thought she was gaining, whatever future she believed she was stepping into, she had already lost something far greater. Me. That realization settled over me, cooling the anger that had been simmering beneath the surface. I wasn't going to chase after her. I wasn't going to demand answers she didn't deserve to give. I was done. I turned away again, ready to leave, when I heard it, her voice, soft but sharp, cutting through the night air like a blade. You don't even care, do you? I stopped but didn't turn around. What? That's it? You just walk away? There was an edge of something in her tone. Frustration? Disbelief? Panic? I turned my head slightly, just enough to see her out of the corner of my eye. What do you want me to do, Sheila? Beg you to stay? Cry? Scream? Because if that's what you're waiting for, you're going to be waiting a long time. Her lips parted like she had something to say, but nothing came out. And for the first time since this all started, I saw it. Doubt. Just a flicker, just a second. But it was there. She expected me to fight. She expected me to be broken. And maybe, deep down, she even wanted that. Because if I fell apart, if I crumbled beneath the weight of her betrayal, then maybe she could convince herself that she had mattered more than she did. That she still had some kind of power over me. But she didn't. Not anymore. I watched as she swallowed hard, her grip on her phone tightening. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the doubt was gone, replaced with that same cold detachment she had worn like armor all night. Fine, she said, lifting her chin. If that's how you want to do this, then fine. She reached down, grabbed her suitcase, and stepped onto the porch. And that was it. No goodbyes, no last words. Just a final glance at me before she turned and walked toward the waiting car at the curb. I hadn't even noticed it pull up. But now in the dim light, I could see the silhouette of a man in the driver's seat. He didn't get out. He didn't even look in my direction. But I knew. So this was him. The man she had thrown everything away for. I should have been angry. I should have felt some kind of primal rage at the sight of him sitting there waiting to take her away. But all I felt was nothing. Just a strange, quiet certainty that whatever they thought they had, whatever they believed this was, it wouldn't last. Because when something starts in deceit, it always ends in disaster. I stood there and watched as she reached the car, the trunk popping open like it had been rehearsed. She lifted her suitcase, stuffed it inside, and then slid into the passenger seat without hesitation. The door slammed shut, and for a second I thought she might look back. But she didn't. And then, just like that, they were gone. I let out a slow breath, rubbing a hand over my jaw. The street was silent now, empty except for the faint glow of the porch light behind me. I could go inside. Go to bed. Try to sleep. But I knew there was no point. Because no matter how calm I had seemed, no matter how sure I had been when I walked away from her, one fact remained. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The house felt different the moment I stepped back inside. It wasn't just empty, it was hollow, stripped of something invisible but heavy. The walls, the furniture, the air itself, it all felt like it had been drained of meaning. As if the moment she walked out that door, something had been severed, leaving behind only echoes of what used to be. I stood in the entryway, staring at the faint indentations her suitcase wheels had left on the hardwood floor. Funny how something so small, so seemingly insignificant, could mark a space so deeply. I wondered how long those lines would last. Would they fade by morning? Would they be gone in a few days? Or would I always see them, even when they weren't there anymore? I shook the thought away and forced myself to move, but I didn't go to our bedroom. Not yet. Instead, I walked into the kitchen, grabbing a glass from the cabinet with a mechanical slowness, like my body was moving on autopilot. Water. That's what I needed. Something cold, something to ground me. But when I turned to the fridge, my eyes caught on something else. Her coffee mug. It sat on the counter exactly where she had left it that morning. Half drunk, the faint ring of dried liquid at the bottom telling me she had never finished it. I stared at it for a long moment, something bitter curling in my stomach. All the talk about how she deserved better. How her marriage had been dead for a long time. And yet she had still made herself coffee in our kitchen that morning. Still drank from a mug she had used 1,000 times before. Still went through the motions of a life she had already checked out of. I should have thrown it away. Dumped the coffee, washed the mug, erased the evidence of her presence. But instead, I just turned away, walking out of the kitchen and into the living room. The silence in the house felt louder than it should have. The couch sat exactly as we had left it the night before, the throw blanket still crumpled in the spot where she had curled up. The TV remote rested on the armrest, angled just slightly toward her side because she was always the last one to put something on. The scent of her perfume still lingered in the air, faint but unmistakable. I exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over my face. I didn't expect it to hit me this fast. Not regret. Not sadness. Just realization. I had spent years building a life with someone who had no intention of staying in it. And now that she was gone, I wasn't sure what to do with all the space she had left behind. I finally made my way to the bedroom, but the moment I stepped inside, I stopped short. The closet door was open. Her side was empty. I hadn't even heard her packing earlier. Maybe because I had been so wrapped up in my own thoughts, so distracted by the way she had delivered the news with ice in her voice. But now, standing here, looking at the gaping hole where her clothes used to be, something inside me twisted. This was real. She was really gone. And yet, even as I processed that truth, another thought crept into my mind, dark and unwelcome. Had this been the plan all along? Had she been waiting for the perfect moment? For me to be just complacent enough, just blind enough to let her slip away without a fight? I turned, my eyes scanning the room, searching for anything she might have left behind. A note? A message? Some kind of final word? But there was nothing. Just absence. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my thumb hovering over the screen. Should I call her? No. What would I even say? Should I text her? Ask her if she really meant what she said? If she had really been unhappy for so long? But then my gaze shifted, landing on the nightstand. And that's when I saw it. Her wedding ring. It sat there, placed neatly on the surface, as if it had never meant anything at all. I swallowed hard, my fingers curling into a fist at my side. That was it, then. The final statement. She had walked away without it, without a second thought. I should have felt something more. Anger, devastation, something. But all I felt was exhaustion. I reached out, picked up the ring, and turned it between my fingers. The metal was cool against my skin, smooth and familiar. Once, this had been a promise. A symbol of forever. Now, it was just another thing she had discarded. Slowly, deliberately, I walked over to the dresser, opened the top drawer, and dropped the ring inside. It landed with a dull clink against the wood. Then I shut the drawer and turned away. There was nothing left to say. Morning came, but it didn't feel like a new day. It felt like a continuation of the night before, as if time had lost all meaning. I woke up to an empty house, the silence pressing in like a weight I couldn't shake. The first thing I saw was the nightstand, bare except for the faint imprint where her wedding ring had been. It was strange, the way absence could be louder than presence. I didn't get out of bed right away. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, trying to wrap my head around the reality of it all. Sheila was gone. That much was clear. But what wasn't clear, what had been gnawing at the edges of my thoughts since last night, was how long she had really been gone. Because people don't just wake up one day and decide to destroy a marriage. No, this had been planned. And if it was planned, that meant there were signs. Signs I had missed. The thought irritated me. Not just because it meant I had been blind, but because it meant that somewhere in my own house, buried among the mundane details of our life together, were the answers I hadn't seen before. And I wasn't the kind of man to let something go just because it hurt. I threw off the covers and got up, the cold floor jolting me fully awake. I walked to the bathroom first, out of habit more than anything else. Her side of the counter was empty, of course. No toothbrush, no perfume bottles, no clutter of beauty products. Just my things neatly in place, as if I had always lived alone. But then I noticed something small, a single bobby pin resting near the sink. A tiny, insignificant thing, except that it wasn't, because it didn't belong to Sheila. She never used bobby pins. My fingers closed around it as a slow, sinking feeling settled in my stomach. It wasn't just that it wasn't hers. It was that I had seen one just like it before. Weeks ago. Maybe months. On the couch, on the floor of our car, places that didn't make sense. Back then I had brushed it off. A random thing. A stray hair accessory. Something she might have picked up by accident. But now I wasn't so sure. A thought formed in the back of my mind. Unspoken but undeniable. She hadn't been careless enough to leave a trace of another man. But another woman? I forced myself to move, to keep my hands steady as I walked out of the bathroom and into the closet. Her side was empty, as I already knew it would be. But now that I was paying attention, I realized that empty was the wrong word. Because the closet wasn't just missing her things, it was missing too many things. Not just clothes, but boxes, storage containers, even old keepsakes I hadn't thought about in years. She didn't just take what she needed. She took everything she wanted. Which meant she had been packing for a long time. Preparing. Getting ready for this moment long before she ever spoke the words. I'm leaving you. The realization made my throat tighten. I had been living in the past, thinking this all started last night. But the truth was, it had started long before that. She had been pulling away in pieces, small and deliberate, so carefully that I hadn't even noticed. I had still been here, still loving her, still believing in the life we built, while she had already been 1 foot out the door. I turned, scanning the closet one more time before stepping out. My eyes landed on the dresser, and I hesitated for a second before opening one of the drawers, the one where I had dropped her wedding ring the night before. It was still there, lying motionless against the wood. But as I stared at it, another thought entered my mind. She had planned everything. Everything except one thing. Me finding out the truth. And that meant, for the first time since she walked out that door, I had something she didn't expect. A choice. I could sit here, wallowing in the wreckage of a marriage that had already crumbled. Or I could start digging. Not because I wanted her back, not because I needed closure, but because I refused to let her rewrite the story. She thought she had all the power. But she had forgotten something. I was still here. And I was done pretending I didn't see the truth. I wasn't the type of man to go looking for ghosts in my own home. But as I stood there, staring at the empty spaces where Sheila's life used to be, I realized something. She hadn't just left. She had erased herself. And when someone tries that hard to disappear cleanly, it's never a good sign. It meant there were things she didn't want me to find. I wasn't going to let her have that satisfaction. I started small, opening drawers, looking through cabinets. Not because I thought I'd find some grand revelation, but because I needed to understand just how long this had been happening. At first, it seemed like she had covered her tracks well. There were no obvious signs of deception. No hidden letters, no secret receipts, no clues left behind like in some bad movie. But then I opened the nightstand drawer on her side of the bed. And that's when I found it. Not a love note. Not some dramatic confession. Just an old, worn envelope. I almost didn't think much of it until I noticed something strange. My name was written on the front. Not in Sheila's handwriting, though. Someone else's. Someone unfamiliar. I opened it carefully, my fingers trembling slightly despite myself. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded in half. When I smoothed it out, my stomach twisted. It was a hotel receipt, dated nearly a year ago. At first, I thought maybe it had been a work trip, something forgotten and misplaced. But then my eyes landed on the check-in details. 2 guests. 1 room. And the signature at the bottom? Not hers. My breath caught in my throat. It was one thing to suspect, another to know. She had been cheating. And not just recently. Not just in the last few weeks or months. But for at least a year. Maybe longer. I sat down hard on the bed, my mind racing. The way she had acted last night, so cold, so distant, it hadn't been guilt. It hadn't even been regret. It had been relief. She wasn't sad to leave me. She was relieved she didn't have to lie anymore. I clenched the paper in my fist, my jaw tightening. So that was it. The truth I had been searching for. And yet, even as I held the proof in my hands, it didn't make me feel better. It didn't bring me closure. It just made me realize how much time I had wasted on someone who never truly cared. But the worst part? I still didn't know who he was. I forced myself to stand, moving with purpose now. If she had been careful, if she had taken the time to erase her presence, then maybe there was still more to find. I walked to the office, our so-called shared space. It was mostly mine, though. Sheila never cared much for paperwork or organization. That was my thing. I handled the bills, the finances, the responsibilities. She was always content to let me take care of it, brushing off anything that wasn't fun or exciting. But now, as I opened my desk drawer and started sifting through documents, I had a sinking feeling that I had let her get away with far more than just being irresponsible. That's when I saw it. A bank statement. One I had never noticed before. Because it wasn't for our joint account. It was hers. And the balance? Nearly empty. I felt my pulse quicken as I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the transactions. Most of them were normal, shopping, restaurants, small expenses. But then, near the end of the statement, something stood out. Large withdrawals. Recurring. Always at the same ATM, always in cash. And then, the final one. A lump sum. Taken out just 2 days before she left. My stomach dropped. She hadn't just been leaving me. She had been preparing for something. Or someone. I didn't know what was worse, the fact that she had been planning this for so long, or the fact that I had been too blind to see it. I exhaled slowly, setting the papers down. There was no point in confronting her now. She was gone. And even if I did ask her, I already knew what she would say. She'd lie. She'd twist the story, make herself the victim. And I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. Instead, I grabbed my phone and did the only thing that made sense. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. And when the voice on the other end answered, I said the words I never thought I'd have to say. I need your help. The phone line crackled slightly before the voice on the other end spoke, groggy but alert. Joel? There was hesitation in the way he said my name, like he was waiting for me to explain why I was calling after all these years. Yeah, I said, swallowing hard. It's me. Silence stretched for a moment before he sighed. Did something happen? I let out a slow breath, running a hand through my hair. Sheila left, I said finally, the words heavier now that they were spoken out loud. She walked out last night. But that's not why I'm calling. He didn't say anything at first, and I could almost hear him thinking. You found something, he said eventually. Yeah, I admitted, looking down at the bank statements still spread across my desk. And I need to know who. There was a pause and then a deep sigh. Joel, are you sure you want to go down this road? I clenched my jaw. I don't think I have a choice. A long exhale came through the phone. Then, after a pause, he said something that made my blood run cold. I think you already know. I stiffened. A chill ran through my body. My grip on the phone tightened. What the hell is that supposed to mean? You said she was pulling away for a long time, right? He asked, his voice careful now. That she had one foot out the door before she even left? I nodded even though he couldn't see me. You ever think about why she never had to work too hard? He continued. Why she always had money to spend but never enough in her accounts to explain it. The back of my neck prickled, my mind racing. You think someone was helping her? Not just someone. His voice was almost pitying now. Someone close enough that she didn't have to hide it. Someone she thought you'd never suspect. My stomach twisted, and for the first time in this whole mess, I felt something close to real fear. Not of losing her. Not of being alone. But of finally seeing the whole picture. Just say it, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated. Then finally he said the name. And my entire world tilted. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. It wasn't some random stranger. It wasn't an affair with some coworker or a guy she met online. It was someone I had trusted. Someone I had let into my home. Someone I had considered family. I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles white. My chest felt too tight, my vision tunneling. This wasn't just betrayal. This was something worse. Because the name he had just spoken. It was my best friend. For a long time I just stood there, gripping the edge of my desk like it was the only thing keeping me upright. My best friend. The person I had trusted more than anyone. The one I had confided in, laughed with, shared years of my life alongside. And all this time he had been standing next to me while quietly taking everything that was mine. But then something strange happened. The anger I expected, the rage, the humiliation, the gut-wrenching pain, it didn't hit me the way I thought it would. Instead, something lighter settled over me. Clarity. A realization so sharp it almost made me laugh. I had been freed. For so long, I had been fighting to hold onto something that had been broken for years. I had been clinging to a version of Sheila that didn't exist anymore, or maybe never had. I had been willing to give her every chance, to believe every excuse, to overlook the signs. But now? Now there were no more illusions. No more wondering what went wrong or how I could fix it. She was gone. And it was the best thing that had ever happened to me. I let out a slow breath, straightening my back. I wasn't going to let her or my so-called best friend take another second of my life. If they wanted to build their relationship on lies and betrayal, that was their burden to carry. It wasn't mine anymore. With that thought, I grabbed my car keys and walked out the front door. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I knew I needed to get away, to breathe, to think, to start living for myself again. The sky was clear, the air crisp. For the first time in a long time, I felt weightless. I drove with no destination in mind, just letting the road stretch ahead of me. After a while, I found myself near a small cafe I hadn't been to in years. It used to be my favorite place before life got complicated, before I let my world revolve around someone who never truly valued me. I parked and walked inside, the scent of fresh coffee instantly grounding me. And that's when I saw her. Not Sheila. Someone else. She was sitting by the window, absorbed in a book, her fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. There was something peaceful about her, something real. And when she looked up and our eyes met, she gave me a small, knowing smile. Not forced. Not out of obligation. Just genuine. It had been a long time since someone looked at me like that. And in that moment I realized my story wasn't ending here. It was just beginning.